All right, I hate to do this, but is Miami back? No. I mean, that's just the reality. And I'm not even talking about how good they are or might be this season. I mean, when you look at Miami and even Miami fans, when they talk about, being back, they're talking about, the late 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s, where they were a top 5 program year in and year out and winning national titles. So, until they do that, or at least come close to that for a couple of years in a row, then, no, they're not technically back to what they were before. But really, I think that's the wrong question to ask about this year or even any specific year for any team going forward. I think the question really, when it comes to Miami this year, are they for real this year? And at least so far, I think the answer is yes. And I can hear it now with the who have they played? And I get it. They haven't exactly played a gauntlet of a schedule, but they've played who's on the schedule, and they've dominated and blown out everybody that they've played. And once the season starts and the schedule is set, all you can play is the teams that are on there, right? You can't, 2 weeks into the season go, oh, wow, we're pretty good. Let's get rid of South Florida and cancel and schedule Ohio State. It just doesn't work that way. As college football fans, we all would rather see good teams play each other week in and week out. But the reality is there's just not enough good teams to do that. Everybody in the country by the end of the year is going to end up playing some good teams, some bad teams, some average teams. Some teams will have harder schedules than others. That's just the reality. But given the schedule that Miami has had, I don't see how they could have performed any better or impressed people anymore other than what they've done. Now, they have a game this coming Friday night. They're hosting Virginia Tech, so a Power 5 matchup. It'll be their second Power 5 matchup of the year. They played, of course, Florida back in week 1. And yes, Florida is really, really bad. But again, if you watch these games, Miami, Florida, Miami, South Florida, it's you can't just say, well, they played a bad team. Of course, they won by 40. Go back and look at some of Miami's games over the last 15 or 20 years against quote unquote bad teams. They're not beating them. They weren't beating them like they are now. Cam Ward is off to an amazing start as quarterback for Miami. They've got weapons all over the field offensively. They play good along the lines of scrimmage. Now, look, it's not my job to come on here and pump up Miami, and I'm not trying to convince anybody they're winning a national title. In fact, I probably think they're not winning a national title. But I mentioned in my top 25 video the other day, somebody in the top 8 is winning the national title, and Miami was in the top 8. They're one of the teams you have to consider, and there's a few reasons for that. Number one is that they're playing really, really good. They have really good quarterback play. They have depth that they haven't had in years past. Now, I don't think they have the depth of some of the top tier teams that have been recruiting and using the portal at an elite level for, 3, 4, 5 years in a row. Your Georgias, Texas, Bama's, Ohio States like that. But, similar to Tennessee, Miami to me is a lot like Tennessee, honestly. Their starting 22, I think, can potentially compete with almost anybody in the country. Now, we'll see as the season goes along. Injuries are a part of the game, and we'll see what happens. And we don't want anybody to get injured, but the reality is certain teams are set up to withstand injuries more than others. And so we'll see how this sort of progresses as we go along with Miami. But they're in the ACC, right? Somebody from the ACC is guaranteed to get into the playoffs. And if you get into the playoffs, you've got, at least in theory, a shot of winning the national title. And I don't think there's a team in the ACC that has looked better week in and week out this season so far than Miami. Now, we're only through about 4 weeks. We're headed into week 5. Most teams have had at least a bye week, so they've played 3 or 4 games. But Miami has looked really good. Clemson has looked good the last couple of weeks. I know they got blown out by Georgia in week 1. Florida State, just, forget about them. Louisville, I think, is kind of the wild card team. We'll keep an eye on them. They play at Notre Dame this week. But, back to the original question, is Miami back? Well, when you did what Miami did for that 25-ish year period from, sort of mid-'80s to early 2000s, no, they're not technically back until they get back to the top of the college football world. And as good as they are right now, they're not there yet. They could be on their way there, and we'll see how the rest of the season plays out. But are they for real this season? Yeah, I think they are. They have the best odds to win the ACC right now. They have a pretty good chance of doing it. It's almost a lock at this point. I think that they'll at least make the ACC championship game. So we'll see. But back to the game this Friday night. They play at Rutgers. Here it is. Virginia Tech on the road. Rutgers. Miami hosts Virginia Tech. Washington plays on the road at Rutgers. We're going to talk a little bit about that game in a minute, too, because actually both of these home teams are undefeated. So Miami plays Friday night, 7:30 on ESPN. They host Virginia Tech. I'll be live streaming this game, by the way, if y'all want to come hang out on the channel and watch the game with me. We always have a good time on the game stream, so we'll go live 7:30 Friday night, and we can all watch this Miami game. We can all see for ourselves how back they are, or how for real they are, or aren't, or whatever. They're a huge favorite in this one at home, 19.5 points. And, I mentioned them potentially winning the ACC. I mean, you just look at their schedule. They're 4-0, right? Wins on the road at Florida, home against Florida A&M and Ball State, and then on the road at South Florida. So 2 road wins. They beat South Florida 50-15, and they completely dominated that game from start to finish. It was a good win for Miami against South Florida. Now, again, it's South Florida. I know I'm not here to tell you that South Florida is some kind of a world beater, but when you play a team like that, the best you can do is blow them out. And that's what Miami did, 50-15, 62-0 the week before against Ball State, 56-9 against Florida A&M, 41-17 to Florida. Now, you're going to look at that, you're going to, it's the who have they played thing. And again, I understand that. And we still need to see Miami play a top-tier team. I agree with you there in terms of knowing how good they are. But there's no way you can watch Miami play these 4 games this year, or 2 of them. I didn't watch Florida A&M and Ball State, but I did watch the Florida game and the South Florida game. There's no way you can watch Miami play those 2 games and then come away from it going, I don't think Miami's that good. They are good. They're clearly good. The question, and the fair question, is how good? Are they elite would be maybe a fair question you could ask. I can understand that. I need to see them play better competition before I make that determination. I could understand somebody having that approach. But the whole, I don't know if they're any good because they hadn't played anybody thing. Well, if you don't have the ability to watch Miami play these 4 games and come to the determination that they're good or not, I don't know why you're watching football. You should be able to tell. And here's the rest of their schedule. They host Virginia Tech. Again, just mentioned they're almost a 20-point favorite there. They do have to go on the road to Cal. Now, I think Miami is a lot better than Cal, but, back-to-back road games here against Cal and Louisville, that's not easy. Back-to-back road games are never easy. These are conference games. I think Miami's better than Cal. I think Miami's better than Louisville. Louisville made the ACC championship game last year. They just beat Georgia Tech this past weekend. So we'll see. That's sort of the first, whatever you think about Louisville, right? That'll be the best team they've played so far. I think we can agree there. On the road at Louisville, I think that would be a good win if Miami can get that done, and I think they will. It comes in a tricky spot, though, the Louisville game. It's the second of back-to-back road games, October 5th at Cal. You know what? Actually, they don't list it here, but they have a bye week. So it's actually not technically back-to-back road games, because you see they play Cal on October 5th, and then they don't play Louisville till October 19th. I still think the Louisville game is a dangerous game. It's a road game against a ranked team. And even though Florida State is really bad, that's a huge rivalry game, of course, for Miami. And if you're Miami, you cannot get caught skipping or looking past this Louisville game. Now, that's coaching, right? It's going to be up to the coaches to make sure that the team is ready and prepared and focused on Cal and Louisville and not Florida State until it's Florida State week. And so we'll see. But Miami should be favored. Miami will probably be favored on the road at Louisville, I would suspect. And they'll obviously be favored against Florida State. The only chance Florida State has to win this game here is the whole argument about how, it's a rivalry game and weird things can happen. Miami is so much better than Florida State right now, it can't even be put into words. Then they play Duke, which, while being the best team in North Carolina, might be a bragging point for Duke. North Carolina, terrible. NC State, terrible. Wake Forest, terrible. Duke might be the best team in the state of North Carolina. They shouldn't be competing with Miami, right? That's also an interesting game, by the way, because you have the Manny Diaz factor. He's head coach at Duke now, previously head coach at Miami. On the road at Georgia Tech, kind of a revenge game. This was the head-scratching Mario Cristobal refusing to take a knee game from last year, where a fumble late in the game where Miami should have just taken a knee and drained the clock. Instead, they ran the ball, fumbled. Georgia Tech gets it and wins the game in the end. Potential to trip up there, maybe. But again, Miami will be a favorite. Wake Forest, really bad. And then they end the year on the road at Syracuse. And I do think Syracuse is a team that could knock some people off as we go along in the season. They've got a first-year head coach and a bunch of new portal pieces. And some of those pieces have been playing pretty well this year. Now, they lost this past week to Stanford, which was a bad loss. But first-year coaches, a lot of new pieces. Syracuse is a team that could potentially get a little bit better as the season goes along. Now, they'll never be as good as Miami, but you have to go there. It's late in the year. We've seen Miami pull these sort of boneheaded losses out of thin air before, right? The point is, you look at that schedule and you try to find the Miami loss. Maybe you find two, and you really got to reach there. I mean, they're going to have to lose as a favorite if they're going to lose two games. They're favored by 20 against Virginia Tech. They'll be at least that big of a favorite against Cal. I think they'll be a small favorite on the road at Louisville. They'll be a big favorite against Florida State, Duke, probably a touchdown or 10-point favorite at Georgia Tech, big favorite at Wake Forest, and probably 10 to 14-point favorite at Syracuse. They're going to be favored in every one of these games. So I know Miami fans have been annoying on the internet for a long, long time and never won anything, basically, in the internet age. I mean, Facebook's been around since, 2005, 2006. Miami's been in the ACC since 2004, and they've never won it, and fans are annoying with the whole, the U is back, and, the 30 for 30 is the greatest, the U 30 for 30 ever about Miami, and Ed Reed and all 5 rings. They're a legitimate team this year. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't pull a Miami and, take a giant dump on their own foot at some point in the season and maybe blow it. But right now, they look like a pretty good team to me. And what makes me a little bit more confident in Miami this season as compared to teams past is the quarterback play of Cam Ward. Not only is he playing at a high level, he's a veteran with a lot of experience. I know he's a transfer, and this is his first year at Miami. But he doesn't strike me as the type of quarterback. You go back to like Tyler Van Dyke here at Miami, right? He was like terrible the first half, good the second half, inconsistent, good 1 week, bad the next week. I don't think we're going to get that from Cam Ward. Now, I don't think he's going to throw for 400 a game when he starts getting into some of these tougher competitions on the road at Louisville, potentially the Georgia Tech game, maybe on the road at Syracuse. He might not throw for 400 every single week, but I don't think he's going to have some, just boneheaded week where he throws for 1 touchdown and 3 interceptions, can't complete a pass. I think Miami, I think we need to wrap our heads around the idea as college football fans that Miami at this point, I think, is more likely to make the playoffs than to not make the playoffs. Again, there are no guarantees. Anything can happen. I get that. Clemson is red hot. But if Miami goes 12-0 or even 11-1 and loses a close game to Clemson in the ACC championship, they're still getting into playoffs. So I think there's over a 50% chance at this point that Miami gets in. As far as the game this week with Virginia Tech, I mentioned they're a 20-point favorite. I had Miami going 11-1 in my preseason prediction videos, and that one loss was this game against Virginia Tech. Now, I got fooled a little bit by the Virginia Tech hype in the offseason, and they came out in week 1 and lost on the road to Vandy. Now, it turns out Vandy's a little bit better than what we're used to seeing them be. But they're not good enough that they should have beat Virginia Tech if Virginia Tech is the team that sort of they were hyped up to potentially be in the offseason. So I'm not going to stick with my preseason prediction in terms of my weekly prediction that I'm making right now on this Miami-Virginia Tech game. I do think Miami gets the win at home. 19.5 or 20 points is a lot, though. If it gets to 20 or definitely 21, I'd probably take Virginia Tech with the points. I think Miami will win, but I don't know if they're going to win by 4 touchdowns or something. I could see them winning somewhere in the 17 to 20 point range, but I do think Miami gets the job done. And now I want to talk just briefly about the other game on Friday night, which is Washington on the road at Rutgers. Rutgers is not an interesting team, and I get that. Not a lot of people talk about them, and they're most likely not making the Big Ten title game or the playoffs or anything like that. But you can see here they host Rutgers this weekend, 8 o'clock on Fox, and Rutgers is a 2.5-point favorite. But again, if you look what they've done so far this year, a couple of blowout wins against elementary schools, 44-7 and 49-17. And I get it. That doesn't mean a whole lot other than they did what they were supposed to do. But they were actually an underdog last week on the road at Virginia Tech, and they went in there and got the win, 26-23. Now, I know Virginia Tech's not the greatest team around, but still, this is another team where when you look at their schedule, you got to assume, I think, they're going to get the win at home this week. I think they are going to beat Washington at home this week. They're a small favorite. I'm going to bet Rutgers to cover in this game, the 2.5. I think they win by a touchdown. Big game the following week, October 5th at Nebraska. Here, let's click on this one. This one's a little easier to see. October 5th on the road at Nebraska. Big game for both teams, I think. Nebraska took a disappointing loss to Illinois last week. They've got a showdown with Ohio State looming in 3 or 4 weeks. I think this is a big game for both teams here. Rutgers could lose this one for sure. They could, but I think that'll be a good game. But I think they're better than Wisconsin, and they get them at home. I think they're better than UCLA, and they get them at home. At Southern Cal, they'll probably be an underdog and most likely would lose that game. But Minnesota at home, I think they could win that. I think they could win on the road at Maryland. Illinois, I would put this game kind of in the same category as the Nebraska game. Now, they got to play at Nebraska, whereas they get Illinois at home. But I think that will be a good game against Illinois. And then they close up with on the road at Michigan State. 8-4, 9-3, maybe, for Rutgers. And that would be a good year for Rutgers and Greg Schiano. And it's possible they could do a little bit better. If they happen to beat Washington, if they win sort of these 4 games in a row here heading into the Southern Cal game, which is unlikely. It is unlikely. But it's possible that they could beat Washington, Nebraska, Wisconsin, and UCLA. I think they're better than 3 of those teams. Of course, the better team doesn't always win. But I think it's possible. But if they win those 4 and they're undefeated somehow heading into that trip on October 25th to Southern Cal, that will probably be the most attention Rutgers has gotten in a long, long time if that happens to be the case. But anyway, I'm not on here to hype Rutgers up. I just that game's also on Friday night, so I figured we'd talk a little bit about Rutgers here at the end since we were going to talk about the Miami-Virginia Tech game. But let me know down below, what do you think about my kind of classification of Miami like being back versus being for real this year? I do think they're for real this year. I think they're a legitimate threat to win the ACC and to make the playoffs. I really do. Admitting that it is possible they pull a Miami and take a dump on their own foot like we've seen them do several years past over the last 20 years since joining the ACC. But they look like a really good team to me. I think they've got the best quarterback in the ACC. As good as Clemson has played, I would take Cam Ward over Cade Klubnik. Clemson may have a little bit better of a defense than Miami. I think Miami's probably got a little bit better of an offense. It would be a great game if we get to see it for an ACC championship game, and I'm kind of hoping we do get to see it. But let me know, what do you think about that? Back versus just being for real this year. And what do you think about a potential Miami versus Clemson matchup in the ACC championship game in Charlotte? Would you watch? I'm sure you would. I think it'd be a great game. And who do you think would win potentially between Clemson and Miami? And do you think they have a chance to make the playoffs? I do. Anyway, appreciate you watching. Hit the thumbs up. Subscribe if you're new. I'll talk to you again soon. Have a good morning.